Hello, and welcome to Effective Feedback in a Virtual World. If you'd like to join us for today's presentation, the slide deck is available at bit.ly/feedback for students. Hello and welcome. My name is Kristen Adams, and I am a staff development facilitator at the Carbon-Lehigh Intermediate 21. If there's anything I could ever do to support you or your district, please feel free to reach out to me at adamc@cliu.org. Today, we have four main things we're going to accomplish. One, we're going to look at the fundamentals of feedback. What do we know about feedback? Two, we're going to look at how do you give effective feedback. Three, how can you increase metacognition? And four, we're going to look at digital feedback tools and strategies. So what do we know about feedback? Take a minute and think, what do you know about feedback? Feedback is information given to the learner or teacher about the learner's performance relative to the learning goals or outcome. It should aim to improve the student's learning. What expressions do you often hear yourself saying? There's a lot of expressions that we use as teachers. We use them for a variety of different reasons. One of the things that I often hear myself saying is good job or great job. But by definition, those type of feedbacks are just motivational, and we'll explore that more later. Feedback is a process in which learners make sense of information about their performance and use it to enhance the quality of their work or learning strategies. There are many characteristics of effective feedback, but the goal is to enhance the quality of their work. So try to limit your feedback to one or two points that are specific and descriptive. Make sure that you are timely in your feedback and provide a focus for your intended outcome. So when it comes to feedback, there's many of things that we already know. If you're following along with the slide deck, we have a Padlet that you can add your thoughts to our board about what you think about feedback and how you would define it. There are four main types of feedback: motivational, evaluative, descriptive, and effective descriptive. Let's start by taking a look at the motivational feedback. What does this type of feedback provide? It provides the learner a goal, and it helps them make the learner feel good. It's intended to encourage, however, it offers no guidance on how to improve the learner's reasoning. When it comes to evaluative, it's measured through a score or a grade. It summarizes the student's achievement, and there's no guidance on how to improve. The students often get a grade and then stop. In descriptive, it tells the learner what steps they need to move forward. It helps the learner understand what they need to improve, and it guides them on their thinking and reasoning. When we make comments about their strengths and weaknesses of performance, it allows them to evaluate how they're doing and make changes. When we have effective descriptive feedback, the goal is to internalize the effective feedback. It's intended to be used by the learner to independently move his or her reasoning to the next level. So let's take a look at some examples. When it comes to motivational, these are some things we often hear said by the teacher. What powerful words you use to describe the community. Your words create pictures in the mind of your reader and show what is important. It is important to the people who live in this community. As you see, these are motivational phrases. Your work improved. I like how you did this. I appreciate that. Those all are great to motivate the student. However, it often allows the student to stop and not to take it a step further. When it comes to evaluative, these are ones that often show the grade or just give an expression such as well done. This does not allow the learner, as we stated before, to move forward on improvement. And ultimately, the goal of improvement of feedback is to improve. So we want to take what we have heard and to adapt and change so that we can show progress in our learning and start to make those connections. When it comes to descriptive, here's an example of feedback. Most of your spelling is accurate. I found only 2 errors. See if you can find them. Remember the rules for possessives and plurals. Do you see how the teacher explicitly asks them to find their errors? She does not point out what the errors are, but instead prompts them to go back and find those errors, giving them guidance on how to do that. Effective descriptive, there's a bunch of different things you can do to use this type of feedback. Let's take a look at one of them. I agree with the pattern that you have identified in the table. I am not convinced that the rule you wrote works for all the values in the table. How could you prove this? So by describing exactly what you want the learner to do, you're then prompting them through a question that's specific, that allows them to go back and to evaluate what they have done. When we think about feedback, we all gravitate to one. Think about which one you gravitate the most to and why. Here's some strategies to give effective feedback. Feedback should be 3 things. 1, targeted, specific, and timely. The feedback is highly individualized, detailed, and recommends specific, individualized improvement and strategies to encourage continued progress towards mastery. We want to make sure that it's not simply advice or evaluation. Avoid simply saying things like, come to tutoring, awesome job, 2 out of 5 points earned. And the last is positive reinforcement. It should be a reinforcement of both academic performance and successful behaviors that you want to see. So here's an example. Thank you for coming into tutoring prepared with specific questions. You are acknowledging the behavior and the performance. Thank you for doing this, and then you're telling them why you're thankful that they did that. Well, they came prepared with what? Specific questions. Here's a quote from Educational Leadership that I think is really important to remember. Asking students to think about their work before receiving feedback scratches up the soil in the brain so the feedback seeds have a place to settle in and grow. Our goal is to plant those seeds, to scratch up that surface and plant them. So think about the feedback that you're giving to your students. Does that scratch up the soil? When it comes to grade versus feedback, they both are a valuable part of the process for learners. This article from Ed Leadership talks about 7 things to remember when you're giving feedback. And here are the 7 things. 1, feedback is not just advice, praise, or evaluation. It's information about what we're doing in our efforts to reach a goal. The second one, which I think is probably the most important, is creating that safe place for students to make mistakes, knowing that they are likely to learn from the feedback and to continue to learn when they have feedback that guides them to understanding. 3, the feedback students give teachers can be just as powerful or even more powerful than the feedback that teachers give students. So it's a 2-way dialogue. 4, when we give grades as part of our feedback, students routinely read only as far as the grade. So make sure that your feedback is allowing them to go back to and evaluate their learning. The next one is effective feedback that occurs during the learning when there is still time to act on it. So make sure you have an opportunity for students to go back, think about what they did, and to make corrections before submitting for their final grade. 6, most of the feedback the students receive actually comes from their peers and other things that they hear in the classroom. Oftentimes, these can be misconceptions. So make sure you take time to address the things that you're hearing in the classroom and to address any misconceptions you hear and point them in the correct direction. The last one is students need to know their learning target. So make sure that you explicitly tell your students what you're asking them to do. So as we get into our next part, we're looking at metacognition. Metacognition is vital for students to thrive in college and careers and continue to be a lifelong learner. It promotes autonomy and resiliency. When students improve their metacognition skills, they are more likely to embrace a growth mindset and learn from their mistakes. If we want students to grow into problem solvers and critical thinkers, we need to help them to develop metacognition. So let's take a look at the metacognition cycle with a short little clip. What is metacognition and why does it matter? Metacognition is the ability to think about thinking. In academic terms, it is not what do I need to learn, but how can I learn it best? Metacognition can be taught by asking students to think about the ways they can successfully learn. 7 great metacognitions questions. What should I do first? Is anything confusing to me? Can I explain what I've learned? Should I ask for help, extra help? What did I get? Why did I get this answer wrong? Can I apply this in a different context? How can I do better next time? Questions like those help students plan more effectively, understand their strengths and weaknesses, and reflect and improve their learning. So take a look at the type of questions that were in that video. The goal of these questions is to prompt them to further learning. And if you take a look at the metacognition cycle on the right-hand side, you can see it's a constant cycle of reflecting, assessing, evaluating, planning, and applying their strategies. So how do you get students to begin to do this? There's a few powerful things. If you think about the purposeful feedback loops, you want to encourage your students to practice that. When they get a piece of information, are they really looking at assessing and evaluating how they're doing, planning for an approach to try again, or applying current strategies, and then reflecting? When it comes to content specific, make sure that you're looking at the specific content areas and how they might look differently. The most important thing is to be you. You need to set the tone of your classroom. The feedback that you give your students should mirror your own personality, and make sure you build off of theirs as well as you build off the answers that they give you. Let's talk about increasing feedback. Feedback is just not another box to check off. I know it's another thing you need to add to your to-do list, but here's a quote that's powerful and how to guide us in our understanding of feedback. If there's a single principle teachers need to digest about classroom feedback, it is this: the only thing that matters is what students do with it. No matter how well the feedback is designed, if a student does not use the feedback to move their learning forward, it is a waste of time. So consider how you give students feedback and how students can use it. How can we increase our effectiveness in feedback? Feedback is what happens second. And to make the feedback effective, teachers need to make appropriate judgments about when and how and what level to provide appropriate feedback, to which all of these questions answer. So if we think about our feedback and we think about that we're giving, our teaching is coming and then our feedback is happening. So it's the second thing that happens. So think about, are you observant of what's happening in your classroom? Get curious. Seek out feedback and do research to understand what the problem is in the classroom. Ask your students why they don't know. Take action to change the problems and continue to stay curious about the problem at hand. So here's a few things that you can ask yourself. 1, did the students use the best strategy? Did the students use the correct amount of effort? And attitude, is the student using positive self-talk and having a growth mindset? If any of these things are lacking, this is where you can take an opportunity to stay curious and figure out why and help your students progress to the next level. One of the things that can cause us to trip a little bit in the classroom is when we have a student respond with, I don't know. So there is an excellent podcast that I've linked in the slide deck that you can listen to by Connie Hamilton. And to summarize, this is what she was talking about with I don't knows. When a student recognizes they don't know something, it should be a transition to knowing, not a termination of thinking. So in her article, if you click through, she goes through how to handle I don't knows. And there's a few things that she talks about. So when a student says they don't know, we need to change the culture in our classroom by getting rid of the I don't knows. So here's a few suggestions. Start by saying goodbye. So brainstorm with your students different ways that you can respond when you don't know the answer. Maybe it's a different word that they can use. Maybe they need more wait time. Maybe they need to consult with another student. So you want to explore the reasons behind why they say they don't know. What exactly is causing them? So here's a few examples if you take a look. Brainstorm with students all the accurate reasons they might use I don't know. You might hear responses like, I didn't hear the question, I don't understand the question, I'm not sure if my answer is correct. All of those things are acceptable responses. If we think to our job now, there's oftentimes we come to a point that we don't know the answer. As an adult learner, what do? We often either state that we don't know, that we'll get back to them when we have the right answer. So I don't know can be an acceptable answer if it's followed up by something else. Also here, there's a great link that talks about how to rephrase. So what to say when you don't know. This could be a great anchor chart or an activity that you can do with your classroom. So when the reason is, I didn't hear the question, so this is how you can rephrase it. Can you repeat the question, please? So having our students have a tool bank of different ways to handle I don't knows and different responses that they can give that are acceptable will allow that safe place for learning to occur. The last section is opportunities to use digital resources online to help give feedback to students. There are many applications out that are web-based that you can use with your students. I will breeze through these. If you'd like to explore them more, they're all linked in the slide deck. One of them is Seesaw, which you can have a digital portfolio, and you can have the simple parent communication and student communication based on the articles and the artifacts that they submit. Kahoot is a great way to engage your students and get data and feedback right on the spot of how they're doing. You can also use this in Zoom by doing a poll. Through annotation on Google, you can have students use the highlighter tool, and you can give feedback or highlight for them and ask them a follow-up question. There are many applications that will give quick, easy communications for feedback, such as Remind and Class Dojo. Edmodo looks like Facebook, and you can post things and your students can participate and have feedback going online. If you have a bunch of resources that you would like your students to explore, you could always link them together in a news-like format through S'more. Grammarly is a great way to check for plagiarism if you are not sure if a student has accurately wrote this or has taken it for somewhere else. You could use a resource like Grammarly. Vocaroo is a great way to give spoken feedback instead of written feedback. Loom, you can create a video to share with your students, and you could also use it as a pre-lesson recording to get the students ready to learn. Flipgrid is constantly adding new features, but this is one way that you can share a video with your students and ask your students to respond back to you. Don't underestimate the power of using your phone to communicate with your students to give them direct feedback. Padlet and Lino are great ways to create a space for students to post their feedback, and you can respond as well. A few things just to remember: always read all of your terms and usage and privacy policies that you want your students to participate in. Make sure that students have the capability, and carefully consider the logins and the ease of using the application before you start to use it in your classroom. So take a minute now, and I want you to get a piece of paper for a quick write. What are your next steps? Start to reimagine the most meaningful forms of feedback for online learning environments. Share one of your takeaways. What's one thing you're going to do to take your classroom in terms of feedback to the next level? Here's a few things that I would encourage you to think about. Do you understand the 4 types of feedback? Do you know how to give effective feedback? And how will you give effective feedback to your students? What will you add or take away when you give feedback to increase metacognition? And what is one digital tool you will try? Thank you for joining me today for effective feedback in a virtual world. If you have any questions or anything that I can do to support you, feel free to reach out to me at adamsc@cliu.org. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.